The soft glow of the setting sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the dining room table. Dinner should have been a time for family bonding, but in our home, it was often the prelude to a storm. Eric's presence loomed over us like a dark cloud, his mood volatile and unpredictable. As I set the plates on the table, I could feel Eric's eyes boring into me, his silent disapproval hanging heavy in the air. I glanced nervously at Kelly, who sat across from me, her gaze fixed on her plate. She was only 10 years old, but already she bore the weight of her father's temper like an old soul. "Eric, could you pass the salt, please?" I asked tentatively, hoping to diffuse the tension that seemed to thicken with each passing moment. Eric's response was a low grunt as he pushed the salt shaker across the table with more force than necessary. I bit my lip, resisting the urge to shrink under his gaze. Kelly shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her fingers tracing patterns on her napkin. "Daddy, can I be excused?" Kelly asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Eric's jaw clenched, and I held my breath, bracing for his reaction. "Not until you finish your dinner," he snapped, his tone harsh and unforgiving. Kelly's shoulders slumped, but she nodded silently, picking at her food with little appetite. The tension in the room was palpable, suffocating as we sat in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. Finally, unable to bear the oppressive atmosphere any longer, I cleared my throat, attempting to break the ice. "So Kelly, how was school today?" I asked, forcing a cheerful tone into my voice. Kelly glanced up, a flicker of relief crossing her face at the change of subject. "It was okay," she mumbled, her eyes darting nervously towards Eric. Before I could say anything else, Eric's voice cut through the air like a knife. "Don't talk with your mouth full, Kelly," he barked, his eyes narrowing with displeasure. Kelly fell silent, her gaze returning to her plate as she chewed her food slowly, her discomfort palpable. I exchanged a helpless glance with her, feeling the weight of Eric's control pressing down on us like a suffocating blanket. Dinner time had become a battleground, and tonight was no exception. The tension at the dinner table reached a crescendo as Eric's simmering anger threatened to boil over. Kelly sat quietly, her heart pounding in her chest as she watched her mother, Melissa, struggle under her father's oppressive glare. Something inside her snapped, a fiery determination igniting in her chest. "No more, Dad," Kelly's voice trembled, but her resolve was unwavering. "You can't keep hurting Mom like this." The words hung in the air, a stark challenge to Eric's authority. Melissa's eyes widened in shock, a mixture of fear and pride flickering across her face as she watched her daughter stand up to her abusive father. Eric's expression darkened, his fists clenching at his sides as he turned his wrath towards Kelly. "How dare you speak to me like that?" Eric's voice was laced with venom, his eyes blazing with fury. Kelly swallowed hard, but she refused to back down. "I won't let you hurt Mom anymore," she said, her voice stronger now, fueled by a courage she never knew she possessed. Eric's rage boiled over, his face turning red with anger. "You little brat," he spat, his words dripping with contempt. "You think you can defy me in my own house?" Melissa watched in horror as Eric advanced towards Kelly, his towering figure casting a shadow over her small frame. But Kelly stood her ground, her chin held high, her eyes blazing with defiance. Before Eric could reach her, Melissa intervened, placing herself between them. "Stop, Eric," she pleaded, her voice shaking with fear. "She's just a child." But Eric's rage knew no bounds. With a violent shove, he pushed Melissa aside, his eyes fixed on Kelly with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. In that moment, Kelly knew that she had crossed a line from which there was no turning back. But she also knew that she could no longer stand idly by while her father terrorized their family. The time for silence was over. The air crackled with tension as the confrontation between Eric and his family reached a boiling point. Melissa stood between her husband and daughter, her heart pounding in her chest, her hands trembling with fear. Kelly's defiance had sparked something inside her, a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could break free from Eric's iron grip. "Daddy, please," Kelly's voice wavered, but her eyes were filled with determination. "You can't keep doing this to us." Eric's face contorted with rage, his fists clenched at his sides as he glared at his daughter. "You will show me respect, young lady," he spat, his voice dripping with malice, "or there will be consequences." Melissa's heart sank as she watched her husband's anger consume him, his towering presence casting a shadow over their small family. But she knew that she couldn't stand by and let him intimidate their daughter any longer. "Eric, stop." Melissa's voice was steady, despite the fear that threatened to consume her. "She's just a child." But Eric's rage knew no bounds. With a violent shove, he pushed Melissa aside, his eyes fixed on Kelly with a chilling intensity. In that moment, Kelly knew that she had to take a stand. With a newfound courage coursing through her veins, she stood her ground, her chin held high, her eyes blazing with defiance. "I won't let you hurt Mom anymore." Kelly's voice trembled, but her resolve was unwavering. "We deserve better than this." Eric's face turned an alarming shade of red, his nostrils flaring with anger. "How dare you defy me?" he roared, his voice echoing through the room. But Kelly refused to back down. "I'm not afraid of you anymore, Dad," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at her insides. "We deserve to be treated with respect, and we won't let you bully us any longer." Melissa watched in awe as her daughter stood up to Eric, her heart swelling with pride despite the danger that loomed over them. It was a risky move, confronting Eric like this, but Melissa knew that they couldn't continue living in fear. It was time to break free from his control, no matter the cost. In the aftermath of Kelly's courageous confrontation with Eric, Melissa found herself grappling with a newfound sense of determination. She couldn't ignore the truth any longer. Their family was trapped in a cycle of savagery, and it was up to her to break free. "Kelly, go to your room," Melissa said, her voice firm but gentle, as she ushered her daughter away from the brewing storm between herself and Eric. Kelly hesitated, her eyes filled with concern for her mother. "Are you going to be okay, Mom?" she asked, her voice trembling with worry. Melissa forced a reassuring smile, despite the turmoil raging inside her. "I'll be fine, sweetheart," she replied, her voice steady. "Just go and wait for me in your room, okay?" As Kelly reluctantly obeyed, Melissa turned her attention back to Eric, steeling herself for the confrontation that was about to unfold. She knew that breaking free from his control would not be easy, but she refused to continue living in fear. "Eric, we need to talk," Melissa said, her voice tinged with a newfound resolve as she faced her husband head-on. Eric's eyes narrowed with suspicion, his posture rigid with tension. "What do you want to talk about?" he replied, his voice dripping with contempt. Melissa took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of courage she possessed. "I can't do this anymore, Eric," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "I can't live like this, constantly walking on eggshells, afraid of what you might do next." Eric's expression darkened, his fists clenching at his sides as he realized the gravity of Melissa's words. "Are you threatening to leave me?" he demanded, his voice tinged with anger. Melissa shook her head, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'm not threatening anything, Eric," she said, her voice steady. "I'm telling you that I refuse to continue living like this. We deserve better. Kelly deserves better." Eric's eyes flashed with fury, his jaw clenched with rage. "You think you can just walk away from me?" he spat, his voice laced with venom. But Melissa stood her ground, her resolve unwavering. "I'm not walking away, Eric," she said, her voice tinged with sadness. "I'm walking towards a better life for myself and for our daughter. And if you can't accept that, then maybe it's time for us to go our separate ways." With Melissa's decision to break free from Eric's control, she knew she needed to gather evidence to support her case. She couldn't rely solely on her word against his. She needed concrete proof of his abusive behavior. With determination fueling her actions, Melissa reached out to her friend Dylan for help. "Dylan, I need your help," Melissa said, her voice trembling with urgency as she poured her heart out to her friend. Dylan listened intently, his brow furrowing with concern as he heard Melissa's harrowing tale of savagery. "I'm here for you, Mel," he said, his voice filled with empathy. "What do you need me to do?" Melissa's mind raced as she outlined her plan to gather evidence of Eric's abusive behavior. She needed documentation, photographs, recordings, anything that could corroborate her claims and strengthen her case. "We need to be careful," Dylan cautioned, his expression grave. "If Eric finds out what we're doing, he could retaliate." Melissa nodded, her heart pounding with fear at the thought of Eric's potential reaction. But she knew she couldn't let fear hold her back. She had to do whatever it took to protect herself and her daughter. Together, Melissa and Dylan devised a plan to document Eric's abusive behavior without arousing his suspicion. They set up hidden cameras in the house, capturing footage of his outbursts and violent tirades. They recorded phone calls and conversations, gathering damning evidence of his controlling and manipulative behavior. As the days passed, Melissa and Dylan worked tirelessly to gather as much evidence as they could. It was a risky endeavor, fraught with danger and uncertainty, but they knew it was necessary to build a strong case against Eric. "You're doing the right thing, Mel," Dylan said, his voice filled with admiration as they reviewed the evidence they had collected. "We're going to get through this together." Melissa smiled weakly, grateful for Dylan's unwavering support. She knew that they still had a long road ahead of them, but with each piece of evidence they gathered, she felt a glimmer of hope that justice might finally be within reach. As Melissa and Dylan continued to gather evidence of Eric's abusive behavior, tensions in the household reached a breaking point. Eric's control over Melissa and Kelly began to slip, and he grew increasingly desperate to maintain his grip on them. One evening, as Melissa and Kelly huddled together in their small bedroom, the sound of Eric's angry shouts echoed through the house. Melissa's heart raced with fear as she heard his footsteps approaching their door, his voice filled with rage. "Open this door, Melissa," Eric's voice boomed, his fists pounding against the wood. "We need to talk." Melissa exchanged a worried glance with Kelly, her heart pounding in her chest as she braced herself for the confrontation that was about to unfold. "Dylan, what do we do?" Melissa whispered, her voice trembling with fear. Dylan's expression was grim as he listened to Eric's shouts from outside the door. "We stick to the plan," he said, his voice firm. "We can't let him intimidate us. We have the evidence we need to protect ourselves." With Dylan's words echoing in her mind, Melissa took a deep breath and unlocked the door, steeling herself for the confrontation that awaited them. As Eric burst into the room, his face contorted with rage, Melissa stood her ground, her eyes flashing with defiance. "What do you want, Eric?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at her insides. Eric's eyes narrowed with suspicion as he glared at Melissa, his fists clenched at his sides. "I want to know what you're planning," he spat, his voice dripping with venom. "I know you've been talking to someone behind my back. Who is it?" Melissa's heart raced as she met Eric's gaze, her mind racing with fear and uncertainty. But she refused to let him intimidate her any longer. "We're not doing anything illegal, Eric," she said, her voice tinged with defiance. "We're just trying to protect ourselves from your savagery." Eric's face turned red with fury, his jaw clenched with rage. "You think you can justify me like this?" he roared, his voice echoing through the room. But Melissa stood her ground, her resolve unwavering. "We're not afraid of you anymore, Eric," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "We're going to get out of this, no matter what it takes." With Eric's control over Melissa and Kelly crumbling, they found themselves on the brink of a new chapter in their lives. As they prepared to break free from his abusive grip, they leaned on each other and their newfound allies for support. "Are you ready for this, Mom?" Kelly asked, her voice tinged with excitement and apprehension as they packed their belongings. Melissa smiled warmly at her daughter, her heart swelling with pride at the strength and resilience she'd had shown throughout their ordeal. "I'm ready, sweetheart," she replied, her voice filled with determination. "We're going to start fresh, somewhere far away from here." As they made their final preparations to leave, Melissa and Kelly were joined by Dylan and other friends who had rallied around them in their time of need. "We're here for you, Mel," Dylan said, his voice filled with conviction as he clasped Melissa's hand in his own. "No matter what happens, we've got your back." Melissa's eyes brimmed with tears of gratitude as she looked around at the faces of her friends, knowing that they had played a crucial role in helping her and Kelly escape from Eric's savagery. "Thank you, Dylan," Melissa said, her voice choked with emotion. "We couldn't have done this without you." With their belongings packed and their resolve steeled, Melissa, Kelly, and their friends set out into the unknown, leaving behind the pain and suffering of their past life. As they drove away from Eric's house for the last time, Melissa felt a sense of freedom wash over her, a weight lifted from her shoulders that she had carried for far too long. "We're finally free," Kelly whispered, her voice filled with wonder as she looked out at the open road stretching out before them. Melissa smiled, her heart swelling with hope for the future. "Yes, we are," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "And we're going to make the most of it, together." With each passing mile, Melissa and Kelly embraced their newfound freedom, knowing that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, unbroken and unstoppable.